Fires. I need to see your papers. Are you a U.S. citizen?
Yes. I was born in Mississippi in 1948. I served 2 tours in Vietnam with the 173rd Airborne. What's this about?
We've received information that you may not be legally present in this country. I need documentation proving your citizenship.
Not legally.
Raymond Walker never thought he'd have to prove his American citizenship at 75 years old, standing outside a Veterans Affairs clinic where he'd just picked up his medication. He'd survived 2 tours in Vietnam, watched friends die in rice paddies, came home to a country that didn't want to acknowledge his sacrifice, and built a quiet life despite it all. Now a Homeland Security investigations agent, responding to what would later be revealed as a malicious false report, was demanding papers from a decorated combat veteran in a strip mall parking lot. The surveillance cameras caught every moment of the confrontation that would expose how easily federal power could be turned against those who had given everything for their country. This is the story of how one man's refusal to be diminished, backed by irrefutable evidence of service and citizenship, would result in a $16.8 million reckoning. Before we continue, where are you watching from? If this is your first time here, please hit that subscribe button. Stories like these need to be shared, and your support helps us bring more truth to light. Raymond Walker's life had been defined by service and survival. Born in Greenwood, Mississippi in 1948, he'd grown up during the tail end of Jim Crow, the youngest of 6 children raised by a mother who cleaned houses and a father who worked at the cotton gin. He'd watched the civil rights movement unfold from the perspective of a small southern town where change came slowly and often violently. His older brother had been beaten for trying to register to vote. His uncle had disappeared after a confrontation with white men, never found. When Raymond turned 18 in 1966, he had limited options. College wasn't financially possible. Jobs in Greenwood for young black men were scarce and paid barely enough to survive. The military offered a path out, and despite his mother's tears and his father's warnings about how the military treated black soldiers, Raymond enlisted in the Army. He'd been assigned to the 173rd Airborne Brigade and deployed to Vietnam in early 1967, arriving during the height of American involvement. His first tour was 15 months of hell, the Battle of Dak II, operations in the Central Highlands, constant patrols through jungle where death could come from any direction. He'd seen things no 18-year-old should see, done things that still haunted him in quiet moments. But he'd also found brotherhood, men of all races who depended on each other to survive, where competence mattered more than skin color. He'd come home in 1968, right after the Tet Offensive, to a country in turmoil. The anti-war movement was in full swing, and veterans weren't exactly welcomed with parades. For Raymond, a black veteran from Mississippi, it was even worse. The civil rights movement was still fighting battles at home, and he'd been fighting a different war overseas. He felt caught between worlds, belonging to neither fully. But he'd volunteered for a second tour in 1969, not out of patriotism exactly, but because Vietnam made more sense to him than America did at that point. His second tour was even more brutal than the first. He'd earned a Purple Heart after taking shrapnel during an ambush near Pleiku, spent 2 months recovering, then returned to his unit. He'd also earned a Bronze Star for valor, though he rarely talked about what he'd done to earn it. He'd finally come home for good in 1970, 22 years old and feeling 50. The VA had helped him get treatment for his wounds, though the psychological scars were largely ignored in that era. He'd used the GI Bill to get training as an auto mechanic, settled in Phoenix, Arizona where he had no family history and no painful memories, and built a quiet life. He'd worked at the same auto shop for 30 years, married a schoolteacher named Dorothy, raised 2 daughters and became a grandfather to 4. Now at 75 he was retired, his wife had passed 3 years earlier, and his days were structured around doctor's appointments at the VA, coffee with other veterans at the VFW hall, and helping his daughters with their kids. His body bore the marks of war and age, the limp from the shrapnel wound that still ached when it rained, the hearing loss from artillery, the nightmares that never completely went away. Tuesday, November 14, 2023 started ordinarily enough. Raymond had an appointment at the VA clinic in North Phoenix to pick up his monthly prescriptions for blood pressure medication and the pain medication he took for his leg. The appointment was at 9 a.m., and he'd arrived early as he always did, a habit from the military where being on time meant being 15 minutes early. He'd spent 40 minutes in the waiting room, another 20 minutes with the pharmacist going over his medications, and walked out of the clinic at 10:15 a.m. carrying a white paper bag with his prescriptions. The clinic was in a strip mall, sharing space with a tax preparation service, a dollar store and a small grocery. The parking lot was busy with morning shoppers and people coming and going from the various businesses. Raymond walked slowly to his truck, A 15-year-old Ford F-150 he maintained meticulously despite its age, parked in a spot that gave him a clear path to the sidewalk because of his leg. He was unlocking the door when a man approached from his left, moving quickly with the purposeful stride of someone on official business. "Excuse me, sir. I need to speak with you." Raymond turned to find a white man in his mid-30s, wearing business casual clothes, khakis and a polo shirt, with a badge clipped to his belt and what looked like a service weapon visible on his hip. The man held up an identification wallet showing credentials for Homeland Security Investigations, a division of Immigration and Customs Enforcement. "I need to see your papers," Special Agent Kyle Morrison said, his voice carrying an edge of authority that expected immediate compliance. "Where were you born?" Raymond felt his chest tighten, a reaction that was part confusion, part anger, and part something deeper, the feeling of being challenged in a way that questioned his fundamental right to exist in a space. But he kept his voice calm, the discipline of 75 years in military training controlling his response. "Son, I was born in Mississippi in 1948. I served 2 tours in Vietnam with the 173rd Airborne Brigade. Now what's this about?" The strip mall's parking lot surveillance camera, mounted on a light pole and monitored by the property management company, captured the entire interaction in clear high-definition video. The camera angle showed both men's faces, their body language, every gesture and expression. Morrison stepped closer, his posture aggressive. "Sir, we've received information that you may not be legally present in this country. I need documentation proving your citizenship. Birth certificate, passport or naturalization papers." "Not legally present?" Raymond's voice rose slightly, 60 years of accumulated experiences with discrimination and disrespect bubbling up. "Boy, I was dodging bullets in the Mekong Delta while you were probably still in diapers. I've got shrapnel in my leg from IA Drang. I've got a Purple Heart and a Bronze Star sitting on my mantle at home. What kind of documentation are you looking for?" Should federal agents be allowed to demand proof of citizenship from citizens based solely on anonymous tips? Comment below, because what happened in this parking lot exposes how service to country means nothing when bias decides who belongs. Morrison's face flushed, the camera capturing his reaction to Raymond's tone. "Sir, I'm a federal agent conducting an official investigation. I don't care about your military service. I care about your legal status in this country. Show me documentation right now or you'll be detained for further investigation." "Don't care about my military service?" Raymond's voice was incredulous now, his legendary patience, honed through decades of dealing with racism more subtle than this, beginning to crack. "I fought for this country. I bled for this flag. I came home with pieces of metal in my body that still set off metal detectors. And you're standing here asking me to prove I'm American?" A second vehicle pulled up, another HSI agent emerging. Agent Sarah Chin approached, her body camera active, adding another angle to the surveillance footage that was recording everything. "Is there a problem here?" "Subject is refusing to provide documentation of legal presence," Morrison said, his hand moving to his belt where handcuffs hung. "I'm preparing to detain for verification." "I haven't refused anything," Raymond said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "I told him I'm an American citizen. I told him I'm a Vietnam veteran. I don't carry my birth certificate around with me because I've never needed to prove I was born in this country. I've got my driver's license, my VA card, my military ID. What else do you people want?" Chin stepped closer, her camera recording Raymond's face, the anger and hurt visible in his expression. "Sir, we just need to verify your status. If you cooperate, this will be quick." "Cooperate?" Raymond pulled out his wallet, his hands shaking slightly, whether from anger or the tremor that had developed in recent years, the camera couldn't distinguish. He extracted his Arizona driver's license, his VA identification card showing his veteran status, and a military retiree ID card he'd carried for over 40 years. "Here." Raymond Walker, born April 15, 1948, in Greenwood, Mississippi. Social Security number 425-68-9234. Served in the United States Army from 1966 to 1970. Honorably discharged. Anything else? Morrison took the cards, barely glancing at them before shaking his head. "These don't prove citizenship. Anyone can get a driver's license. I need birth certificate or passport." "My passport is at home," Raymond said through gritted teeth. "My birth certificate is in a safety deposit box at my bank. I'm 75 years old. I live 20 minutes from here. I can get them and bring them back, or you can call the VA and verify my entire history right now." "That's not how this works," Morrison said. You're coming with us for processing and verification at our facility. The parking lot camera captured what happened next with perfect clarity. Morrison reached for Raymond's arm, intending to guide him toward their vehicle. Raymond, operating on instincts honed in combat and refined through a lifetime of refusing to be diminished, pulled his arm back sharply. "Don't you put your hands on me," Raymond said, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had commanded respect in foxholes and firefights. "I'm a United States citizen. I'm a combat veteran. I haven't committed any crime. You have no legal right to detain me." "You're resisting a federal officer," Morrison said, reaching for his handcuffs. "Turn around right now." "Resisting?" Raymond's voice rose to a shout, drawing attention from people across the parking lot. "I'm exercising my rights as an American citizen. I fought for those rights. I watched men die for those rights. And you're trying to arrest me in a VA clinic parking lot for being black and walking to my truck." Several bystanders had stopped to watch, phones out, recording. The pharmacy tech from inside the VA clinic stepped outside, recognizing Raymond as a regular patient. An elderly white man, also a Vietnam veteran based on his ball cap, approached the scene. "That's Ray Walker," the veteran called out, his voice sharp. "He's a decorated combat veteran. What the hell are you doing to him?" Morrison ignored the gathering crowd, grabbing Raymond's arm more forcefully. Raymond, despite his age and his leg, was still strong from decades of physical labor and military discipline. He pulled away again, stumbling slightly as his bad leg buckled. Chen moved to assist, and together they forced Raymond's hands behind his back. The parking lot camera captured it all. 2 federal agents subduing a 75-year-old combat veteran in a public parking lot, his VA medication bag falling to the ground, his military ID cards scattered on the pavement. The handcuffs closed around Raymond's wrists, and for the first time since the Tet Offensive in 1968, Raymond Walker felt truly helpless. Not afraid, he'd faced down enemy fire and survived, but helpless in a way that hurt worse than shrapnel, in a way that cut deeper than any jungle ambush. "This is wrong," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Everything I did, everything I sacrificed, and you're treating me like I don't belong in my own country." They walked him to their vehicle, the crowd of bystanders growing larger and more vocal. The Vietnam veteran was on his phone, calling someone. The pharmacy tech was recording on her phone. Other people were shouting questions, asking what was happening, demanding to know why a veteran was being arrested. Morrison and Chin ignored them all, placing Raymond in the back of their vehicle, separated from the front seats by a metal barrier. Chen's body camera captured Raymond's face through the barrier, the tears streaming down his weathered cheeks, the disbelief and betrayal evident in his eyes. "I killed people for this country," Raymond said, his voice barely audible. "I watched my friends die. I came home with nightmares that never stopped. And this is how you treat me? This is what my service means." The drive to the HSI field office took 35 minutes. Raymond sat in silence for most of it, his mind cycling through memories. The day he'd enlisted, his drill sergeant telling him he was now part of something bigger than himself, his first firefight when he'd been so scared he'd almost frozen. The moment he'd earned his Bronze Star dragging a wounded soldier to safety under fire, coming home to his mother who sobbed for an hour straight, holding his daughters when they were born, burying his wife 3 years ago with full military honors. All of it felt meaningless now, cheapened by sitting in the back of a federal vehicle with handcuffs on his wrists. At the field office they processed him like any other detainee. Fingerprints, fingers that had pulled triggers in Vietnam, that had held dying men, that had worked on car engines for 30 years. Photos, a mugshot of a decorated combat veteran. Property inventory, his wallet, his medications, his keys, his military ID cards placed in a plastic bag. "I want to call my daughter," Raymond said as they finished processing. "I have the right to a phone call." "You'll get your call after we verify your status," Morrison said, typing information into a computer. "Verify what?" Raymond's patience was exhausted now, replaced by cold fury. "I gave you my social security number. Run it through your system. Call the Department of Defense. Call the VA. I've been in government databases for 55 years. Everything about me is documented, verified, and on record. What exactly are you verifying?" Morrison didn't answer, but he did enter Raymond's information. The response came back within minutes. Raymond Walker, U.S. citizen by birth, social security number issued in Mississippi in 1948, military service from 1966 to 1970, honorable discharge, Purple Heart recipient, Bronze Star recipient, VA benefits recipient since 1970, no criminal record, No immigration violations because he was a natural-born U.S. citizen. Morrison stared at the screen, his face paling. Chin, reading over his shoulder, closed her eyes briefly. They had just detained, handcuffed, and processed a decorated American combat veteran based on an anonymous tip that was clearly false. "Mr. Walker," Morrison said, his voice stiff, "there appears to have been an error. You're free to go." "An error?" Raymond's voice was quiet but carried more weight than any shout. "You detained an American citizen. You handcuffed a 75-year-old combat veteran. You humiliated me in front of my community. And you call that an error?" They returned his property and removed the handcuffs. Raymond rubbed his wrists, the skin red and irritated, and looked at both agents with an expression that made them avoid his eyes. "I want to know what information you received that made you think I wasn't American," Raymond said. "I want to know who reported me and what they said. And I want it in writing." Morrison hesitated, then printed out the complaint that had triggered the investigation. Raymond read it, his hands shaking with rage. Anonymous caller had reported suspicious foreign-looking male at the VA clinic, claiming he didn't sound American and might be using false documents to access VA benefits. No name. No specific evidence. Just foreign-looking and didn't sound American. "Foreign-looking," Raymond repeated, his voice dripping with contempt. "I'm a black man in America, and someone decided that made me foreign. And you responded without question, without verification, without any actual investigation. You just saw a black man and assumed the anonymous racist was right." Neither agent had a response. They couldn't meet his eyes. Raymond walked out of the field office at 2:15 p.m., 4 hours after being detained in the parking lot. His daughter was waiting outside, having been called by the Vietnam veteran who'd witnessed the arrest. She'd canceled her work meetings, picked up her father's truck from the VA clinic, and driven to the federal building with a fury that matched her father's. "Dad, are you okay?" She embraced him in the parking lot, and Raymond broke down completely, sobbing against his daughter's shoulder in a way he hadn't since his wife's funeral. "They treated me like I don't belong here," he said between sobs. "After everything I did, everything I gave, they treated me like I'm nobody." But Raymond Walker was not nobody. He was a decorated combat veteran with documentation, with witnesses, with security footage, and with a daughter who happened to be a civil rights attorney. Within a week, she had assembled a case that would make headlines and change policies. The lawsuit, Raymond Walker versus United States Department of Homeland Security, Special Agent Kyle Morrison, Special Agent Sarah Chin, was filed in federal court 3 weeks after the incident. The complaint was devastating: violation of Fourth Amendment rights, false imprisonment, racial profiling, age discrimination, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and deprivation of rights under color of law. The evidence was overwhelming. The parking lot surveillance footage showed everything. Agents confronting a man holding a VA medication bag, demanding papers, rejecting military ID, forcibly detaining him despite his age and his protests. Chen's body camera footage, reluctantly turned over during discovery, corroborated the surveillance video. Witness statements from the pharmacy tech, the fellow Vietnam veteran, and other bystanders all confirmed Raymond's account. Most damning was the anonymous complaint itself, which couldn't withstand even basic scrutiny. "Foreign-looking, and didn't sound American," applied to a black man from Mississippi who spoke with a Southern accent, revealed the purely racial motivation behind the report. And the agent's failure to conduct any actual investigation before detaining Raymond, despite his military ID, his VA connection, his obvious age, showed a pattern of assuming guilt based on race. The case went to trial 18 months later. The federal courthouse was packed daily with veterans organizations, civil rights groups, and media covering every moment. Raymond testified for 2 full days, walking the jury through his life: growing up in Jim Crow, Mississippi, enlisting to escape poverty, surviving Vietnam, coming home to a country that didn't appreciate his sacrifice, building a quiet life, and then being detained at 75 for the crime of being black in a parking lot. "I've carried shrapnel in my leg for 54 years, he told the jury, his voice breaking. "Every morning I wake up, I feel it. Every time it rains, I'm reminded that I bled for this country. I've got nightmares about things I saw and did in Vietnam. I've lost friends whose names are on a wall in Washington. And after all that, an anonymous racist makes a phone call, and federal agents decide I need to prove I'm American. Tell me, what else could I have done? What else could I have been? How many more times do I have to prove I belong?" His daughter testified about finding her father sobbing outside the federal building, about the change in him after the detention, about the proud man who had raised her being diminished in his own eyes. Military records specialists testified about Raymond's service, his decorations, his honorable discharge. Constitutional law experts testified about the Fourth Amendment violations, the lack of probable cause, the illegal detention. And the surveillance footage played in the courtroom over and over, showing a decorated combat veteran being treated like a criminal in the country he'd fought to defend. The jury deliberated for 9 hours. When they returned, their verdict was unanimous: guilty on all counts. The damages award was extraordinary, $16.8 million total. $5.3 million in compensatory damages for emotional distress, false imprisonment, and violation of constitutional rights. $11.5 million in punitive damages, calculated to send an unmistakable message about the cost of racial profiling and the violation of veterans' dignity. Raymond sat quietly as the verdict was read, his daughters on either side of him, veterans filling the courtroom behind him. When the amount was announced, he didn't celebrate. He simply nodded, a soldier acknowledging a mission completed. Both agents were terminated. The supervisor who had failed to question the obviously flawed anonymous complaint was demoted. HSI announced sweeping policy changes: mandatory verification of anonymous complaints before enforcement action, requirements to accept military ID as valid identification, training on bias and veterans' rights, prohibition on detaining individuals at VA facilities without extraordinary justification. Raymond donated a significant portion of his settlement to veterans organizations and civil rights groups. He became a speaker at military events and civil rights conferences, telling his story not with bitterness but with a determination that it wouldn't happen to others. The parking lot surveillance footage became required viewing in federal law enforcement training, a stark example of how racial profiling operates and the human cost of assuming someone doesn't belong based on their appearance. And in Phoenix, Arizona, Raymond Walker returned to his quiet life, but with something restored that had been taken from him in that parking lot: the certainty that his service mattered, that his citizenship was unassailable, and that even at 75, a combat veteran could fight one more battle and win. If you believe military service should mean something, that veterans deserve respect not detention, and that citizenship isn't determined by how someone looks or sounds, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Because stories like Raymond's remind us that the fight for dignity and justice doesn't end with one victory, it requires constant vigilance and the courage to stand up when authority oversteps its bounds.